All right, well, thanks everyone for taking the time to be here this evening. My name is Andres Lopez-Delgado. I'm a senior staff attorney here at the ACLU of Georgia, and I'm here to talk to you about Senate Bill 63 and the Fulton County Jail campaign. I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end. I do want to try and get through the material I have prepared because there's a good bit of it. I've been given strict instructions around, time and clean takes, so I'm going to try to get through my material, but I will definitely leave some time for questions at the end and really look forward to them. And before we dive in, of course, as folks in this room well know, voting is open, ongoing. We smashed an early voting record yesterday. Hope we smash some more records over the next few weeks. What we're going to talk about tonight involves some troubling trends in mass incarceration in Fulton County and in the state of Georgia. And voting is really, it's critical. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition to making change in these and other issues. Because you have to vote the right people into office, but then you also have to hold those people accountable. And I think part of the story here about the Fulton County Jail is people in positions of power perhaps needing to be held accountable for the conditions in the jail system in Fulton County. So I will dive right in. We're in the middle of an ongoing humanitarian crisis in the Fulton County Jail system, especially its facility at Rice Street, usually referred to as the Fulton County Jail, and also in the space that they now lease from Atlanta, the Atlanta Detention Center. It's made headlines over the past couple of years. 10 incarcerated people, and I think now the number is up to 12, have died at the Fulton County Jail over the past couple of years. There's also rampant violence, really deplorable living conditions, to the point that the Department of Justice is currently actively engaged in an investigation of the Fulton County Jail, responding to, quote, serious allegations of unsafe, unsanitary living conditions at the jail, excessive force and violence within the jail, discrimination against incarcerated individuals with mental health issues, and failure to provide adequate medical care to incarcerated individuals. There's a lot of reasons why we are where we are, but I would say most stakeholders, including Fulton County Sheriff Labatt, agree that a major driver of these conditions is overcrowding. The Fulton County Jail at Rice Street has consistently held hundreds more incarcerated people than its maximum capacity would otherwise allow for, and overcrowding, understaffing, other issues predictably lead to violence, neglect, and death, and we've seen that unfold in real time. So in late 2022, the ACLU of Georgia, in consultation with Southern Center for Human Rights and other coalition partners, issued a report analyzing some population data from Fulton County Jail. And the report, and I have it up here on the screen, is titled, "There Are Better Solutions." And the data analyzed in that report show that overcrowding is largely driven by unnecessary pretrial detention. And I want to get into that. There's a lot of reasons for unnecessary pretrial detention. The big one, I would say, is wealth-based detention. People who are held in the jail pretrial before any adjudication of guilt because they cannot afford the bond that has been set for their release. You're also looking at Fulton County Jail in particular, months-long delays in indicting cases. That's where the DA's office sort of brings formal charges and triggers a lot of the clocks, the speedy trial clock, essentially. But we see folks staying for months, sometimes years, without the DA formally indicting their case. And Georgia law says, once the case has been indicted, it needs to be presented to the grand jury within 90 days. If the case is not indicted, you're essentially, or at least the way it has turned out, lawfully or not, in a sort of gray area, purgatory essentially, where you can stay for a long time. And the average length of stay for folks at the Fulton County Jail is far beyond sort of national average for length of stay. There's also underutilization of diversion programs. So these are programs in Atlanta. There's the pre-arrest diversion program PAD that will take referrals from the Atlanta Police Department of people who are perhaps in a crisis where the appropriate response is not a police response, is not incarceration. Maybe they're in a mental health crisis, dealing with the effects of extreme poverty, and someone, perhaps a social worker, someone who is not a uniformed police officer would be a more effective, response to that situation. PAD also gets referrals from the jail, essentially from the Solicitor General's office, of folks who have been arrested but may be eligible to participate in a program and have their charges dismissed. But we saw back in 2022, and unfortunately still seems true today, that those resources are underutilized, and as a result there are people at the Fulton County Jail who could be eligible for these programs and are not receiving them. I also want to note here, how are we measuring inability to pay, right? Because that may be a question that folks, it's kind of shocking, right, the numbers. We determined that there were, at the time that we issued the report in late 2022, 293 people incarcerated because they're unable to pay bail, 515 people unindicted for over 90 days, 242 people charged with only misdemeanors, and 105 people potentially eligible for diversion. And some individuals fall into multiple of those categories. But folks may ask, how are you measuring, wealth-based detention? And we're looking at folks who have been incarcerated for over 90 days where a bail has been set in their case. A magistrate judge has, in theory, looked at their ability to pay bond, has set a bail amount, and yet that person 90 days later is there with that amount unpaid. In our theory, which I think is a reasonable one, is that folks generally do not want to be languishing in jail, and if they had the means to pay the bond or to secure the services of a bail bonds company with all the issues that brings, they would have done it by then, right? And so that's how we're coming up with that number. And the other point I want to make on that is that 85 to 90% of people charged with a crime in Georgia meet the legal definition of indigency, which means that they fall below the federal poverty line and don't have other resources that they could use to get a lawyer on their own, essentially. So generally, if you're indigent, you're going to qualify for a public defender. It's a reasonable assumption that if you are indigent, you also probably do not have the financial means to pay really any amount of bail. And that can be a real issue for a lot of reasons. But one thing that people may not be cognizant of is, yes, there are for-profit bail bond companies that exist and do great business in this jurisdiction and others. But, the bail bond company essentially gives a promise to pay the full bond amount to the court if the individual who's being bonded out doesn't appear. But the individual, to get that service from the bond company in the first place, generally has to put up a non-refundable deposit of about 15% of the total bond amount. So if someone's bail has been set at $10,000, that person is going to have to come up with $1,500 to give to the bond company to secure release, that even if they show up to every court date past that point, they are never seeing that $1,500 back. And for someone who's indigent, $1,500 is not nothing. I want to talk a little bit about the violence of unnecessary pretrial detention. I think of it as a form of violence because it's violence against the individual who's unnecessarily incarcerated. Their freedom is restricted for days, weeks, months, years at a time, and a lot of the effects of that incarceration spill out and affect their friends, family, and the community at large. So I think there is a violence there done to the individual and the community that they come from that needs to be recognized. People who are incarcerated pre-trial, really for any length of time, are 25% more likely to plead guilty, 43% more likely to be sentenced to jail, and receive sentences that are twice as long as average. And that is in part because being in jail is not a pleasant experience. You are much more likely to want to get out by any means necessary, even if that is a guilty plea. And if you are incarcerated, you have far fewer means or ability to sort of organize your own defense, right? If you're not in the free world, it is harder to secure legal representation, to gather witnesses, to gather information that you can present in your own defense. And so that's part of why you see those outcomes. People incarcerated for misdemeanors are 13.7% more likely to be rearrested on new charges within 30 days, and 9.7% more likely to be rearrested within 18 months. And just setting a money bail amount at all can increase the chance of a rearrest by 6 to 9%. So again, this is affecting the individuals, and it's also affecting the communities that they're coming from. And I want to note that the numbers that I'm pulling from come from a few different sources. The Prison Policy Initiative's review of the feasibility study for the new jail that Fulton County wants to build, which we'll get into in a bit. Our own report, There Are Better Solutions, and also a report by the CCJR, which was a sort of nonpartisan body a few years ago that investigated on a statewide level issues with pretrial detention and bail. Continuing on, the longer a person is detained pretrial, the likelier it becomes that the person will fail to appear or be arrested for a new crime. And you can kind of see, I don't know how legible it is on the screen, this is coming from Advancing Pretrial Policy and Research. But you can see that there's a compounding effect. The longer that someone is incarcerated, the more likely you are to have these negative outcomes. Studies show that longer detentions increase likelihood that people will lose jobs. It causes harm to their children, and it negatively impacts their housing situations. People fall behind on child support, lose their jobs, end up in a cycle of poverty and debt that, again, is likelier to lead to rearrest and reincarceration. People released from incarceration are 40 times more likely to overdose in the 2 weeks after their release, and 18 times more likely to die by suicide. People who are presently incarcerated are twice as likely to die by suicide as the general population. And of course, it needs to be said a lot. These harms are all racialized. 89% of Fulton County Jail population is black, whereas the population for Fulton County as a whole, the black population, is 45%. And those trends are consistent statewide, frankly, nationwide. So unfortunately, some of the only solutions that policymakers seem to have seriously considered is increasing the carceral footprint, right? Leasing space at the Atlanta City Detention Center, which had previously been emptied out, in part through tireless advocacy, over the past decade. And looking to the future, building a $2 billion new jail, which perhaps would replace or be in addition to their existing facilities. And this has really been, the Fulton County Sheriff's Office has been pushing hard for this as the best and only solution. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not. It's not the solution. Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. That's Ray Kinsella, played by Kevin Costner. I had to look up the character name for the for the presentation. But I think it really gets at the core of the issue. This solution is very ahistorical. The Rice Street Detention Center was built in part due to overcrowding concerns from the 80s. The Fulton County Jail of the 80s, overcrowded, deplorable conditions. The solution was a brand new center, more beds. This will solve the issues. Now, a couple decades later, and frankly from its inception, now worsening over a couple decades, the Rice Street Detention Center has been overcrowded. We're seeing the same issues, and again, the solution is build a new facility. Again, if you build it, they will come. You will find reasons to incarcerate people. you will be back to the same overcrowding situation you were in before. And the other issue, among many, is it doesn't really address the root causes of unnecessary pretrial detention that we were just talking about, and doesn't mitigate most of the harms. In theory, in the period after the jail is built, maybe there's a relief on the overcrowding issue until it gets overcrowded again. Maybe the facilities are nicer. There's maybe some less risk of contracting a disease while incarcerated. But a lot of those harms and the violence that we talked about, a new jail doesn't address those at all. Those harms are still going to be felt by people who are incarcerated unnecessarily. Fulton County commissioned an architecture firm to do a feasibility report, and the firm held up, these are some model jails in other jurisdictions that, we could build the new jail to model after, and again, these jails are wonderful, flawless, this will solve our problems. The Prison Policy Initiative issued a report critiquing this feasibility study and actually looked at the reality of some of these model jails that they've cited, and it is not hard to find issues with overcrowding, lawsuits around poor conditions, and I think a consistent through line, understaffing. That is an issue that Fulton County Jail has dealt with for a while now. It's an issue that the Georgia Department of Corrections is dealing with. The DOJ just issued a report saying that the Georgia Department of Corrections has understaffing of roughly like 50% vacancies and has for years. So you can build a new jail, but can you actually hire the staff necessary to staff it when you can't effectively staff existing facilities? So the ACLU of Georgia issued a second report about a year later in 2023 and did see some progress. There was a reduction of roughly 500 people from the population of Fulton County Jail. And there was especially significant improvement in reducing the number of people who are held only on misdemeanor charges. And there's some improvement in speeding up the rate of indictment, although it's still far too long of a timeline for most people. And we're still seeing people in there because they're unable to pay their bail, and we're still seeing underutilization of pre-arrest or pre-trial diversion. And that brings us to SB63. Senate Bill 63 passed in the last legislative session, in a lot of ways seems to target some of the modest reforms that we've seen over the past decade or so. It adds to the list of bail-restricted offenses. So these are offenses for which money bail is required. A judge can't let someone out on what's called a recognizance or a signature bond. A judge has to assess some amount of money that the person has to pay or get a surety bond for. And added to that list, several misdemeanors that are essentially crimes of poverty, and especially the one I want to highlight is criminal trespass, which is an offense that regularly gets charged against unhoused people who don't have a lot of choice of where they lay down to sleep at night, inevitably rack up criminal trespass charges, which with SB 63, I believe it is the second offense then moves you into the bail restricted category. And so, now instead of having, folks trying to address sort of the root cause of the issue, the solution is incarceration. It also imposes, SB 63 imposes some arbitrary restrictions on community bail funds. Thankfully, and this is litigation that ACLU of Georgia engaged in with our partners at the Institution for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection at Georgetown, those provisions of the law are enjoined. But what lawmakers were trying to do was basically make it impossible for community bail funds to operate in the state of Georgia, limiting their ability to post more than 3 cash bonds per year in any given jurisdiction, which of course would make it immediately impossible to operate for any bail fund that's actually having an impact. And also requiring any person or organization, quote, purporting to be a charitable bail fund to meet the requirements that previously applied only to for-profit surety bond companies, including requirements like holding $1 million in escrow, which maybe makes sense for a for-profit surety bond company, not for a community bail fund that pays the bail in cash. So Thankfully, Judge Victoria Calvert on the Northern District enjoined those provisions of the law. She said they were vague, and she said in the alternative that our clients, who are community bail funds, barred business, and individuals with the Coney Street United Methodist Church, alternatively, their free expression was being burdened by the law. So a little bit of a First Amendment tie-in. That's on appeal, and we'll see how that develops in front of the 11th Circuit. But unfortunately, the provisions of the law that add to the list of bail-restricted offenses still on the books, still, I think, causing a lot of harm and threatening to undo some of the modest positive trends we have seen over the past couple of years. And we're also, unfortunately, seeing, we've been pushing hard for Fulton County, City of Atlanta, to be using pre-arrest and pretrial diversion more as a solution to reducing the incarcerated population here. And unfortunately, we're kind of seeing a move away from that in recent months. The Fulton County, the Atlanta City Council is holding up the contract with Policing Alternatives and Diversion Initiative, which I mentioned earlier. And so PAD is continuing to operate but has a massive funding deficit. And the contract has essentially been in limbo for a good part of this year. For me, that's a tough pill to swallow because, yes, the pending contract for PAD is $5 million, but the annual budget for the Fulton County Sheriff's Office in fiscal year 2023 was $143 million, and the Atlanta Police Department's annual budget was $270 million. So again, we have to think about what are the tools we're using to address people, particularly people in mental health crises. Is the solution a police officer, or is the solution someone with PAD who is going to address the root cause of the issue and maybe prevent that person from being incarcerated at all? So our goals moving forward, and these are the goals of the ACLU of Georgia and folks we're in coalition with. There's a sort of umbrella group, Communities Over Cages, that sort of put forward these goals. We want to reduce the total incarcerated population in Fulton County by 30%. We want to stop renewal of the Atlanta City Detention Center lease. And we also want to put pressure on magistrate judges in Fulton County to meaningfully inquire into the ability of folks to pay bond. That is something that the law requires, and that is one of the reforms that happened in 2018 after the CCJR report. But there's the law, and then there's the situation on the ground. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is magistrate judges who are responsible for looking into someone's ability to pay, either not doing it or not doing it on the record, or setting very high bond for people who really, if you were watching proceedings, it seems very unlikely that person is going to be able to pay either the bond or pay the non-refundable deposit to a bond company. Again, 85 to 90% of the people who come before these judges meet the legal definition of indigency. And so when you're setting 20, 30, 50,000 bonds for these folks, you really have to, it's strange credulity to think that the ability for someone to pay is being meaningfully taken into account. And of course, we're going to continue to litigate against SB63, the provisions around community bail funds. That's an active litigation. We're looking at other opportunities to litigate. So the fight continues. But that is where things stand. So I will leave some space for questions.
I don't know if I exactly have a question, but I really wonder what it is that's kind of the rationale behind what they think is going to happen, especially.
Yeah.
Because it's I guess to provide a little bit of context, I'm from here, and so I just graduated from college. I also prioritize decarceration work in my studies, and I want to go to law school for that. So I've been kind of very familiar with how the prison industrial complex works in the state of Alabama, but now returning to my home state, I guess thinking about the fact that we do have a bigger city here than Alabama has, just kind of like niche laws that are coming.
Yeah.
Okay, so what really shocked me is how bail funds are being limited. I guess when I think about bail funds being limited, also the idea of like pricing being bail restricted. Like, what do they think is gonna happen? Like,
Yeah.
especially because it's like after the second time, it's like, okay, I don't have anywhere to go, so where am I gonna be?
Yeah. I wish I had a good answer for you. It's not clear. You know,
When you're having these conversations with law enforcement officials, what's kind of their train of thought as far as you can see? Like when you're like, okay, if you're talking about overcrowding in the prisons and jails, and you have people for nonviolent offenses that you're making face detention, like, how do they see that? Do they not understand that's kind of like perpetuating their own problem?
that's a great point and an interesting one here. SB63, right? That was a legislative solution to what I think is a non-existent problem. But we heard behind the scenes from a lot of folks who maybe were not willing to speak publicly. But law enforcement officials, especially law enforcement officials in like rural counties where, the funds for mass incarcerating people may be more limited, who are not fans of this law, right? Who were then going to be in the position of dealing with the effects that we're now seeing essentially like come to pass in not just, taking a broader lens than Fulton County and Atlanta, statewide. A lot of these jails are overburdened and desperate for like some, release valve here, and what they're getting from state legislators who are, theoretically law and order guys is a law that makes it much harder for them to, find and turn that release valve. Yeah. And community bail funds in particular, we talk to folks, I can't get too specific about those conversations, but, talk to folks who are community bail fund organizers or managers who get calls from local jails where it's like, hey, so-and-so is in here. Does your community bail fund have the funds to like get this person out? Because I don't, this person doesn't really need to be here, and we would rather not have to incarcerate them because it's a burden on us, right? Like, there's a lot of law enforcement officials on the ground who do kind of see the link between decarceration and, like public safety and reducing overcrowding, because there's a pretty like logical and direct link, right? But that's not sort of like playing out when it comes to the policy that is followed, in the State House. And unfortunately in Fulton County also, the policies that seem to be followed like on the county and even city level. But yeah, there's a strange disconnect between what's sort of being pushed as like this is what law and order means versus like people on the ground saying like, well, wait, we're drowning here.
So what do you think in terms of most needed right now? Like, do you think
it's tough? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, do you think that there representatives or more representative legal representatives in kind of like the trauma advocacy space, or what do you think is the deficit right now, or barrier rather?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of barriers, but
like if we were going to walk out of this room with one action item, what do you think is the most important?
I think specifically, like when you're looking at the crisis in the Fulton County Jail system, I talked up front about how, voting is necessary but not sufficient. Mm-hmm. A lot of these decisions about, are we going to invest our resources into building a new jail or renewing the lease, or are we going to fund the, policing alternatives and diversion program? Those are, topics of conversation coming up regularly in Fulton County Commissioner meetings, in Atlanta City Council meetings. And these are elected officials, some of whom, made campaign promises around, reducing jail population, who now seem to be voting in another direction. So I feel like there are a lot of pressure points for motivated folks to, show up at these meetings, testify, disabuse anyone in that room of the idea that, like, because there's not a lot of, maybe if a lot of folks aren't present, there's some sort of like silent agreement with what they're doing. I think they need to be confronted with, there's a lot of loud disagreement with what you're doing. So yeah, I would think like probably I don't want to say easiest thing to do, but maybe the most direct way to attack this problem just for individual, residents of the county is to show up at these meetings to testify. Pack the room.
I think that with any problem, that you want to have an idea of why your opposition is kind of so. What's the benefit of keeping folks incarcerated? Obviously, there has to be some kind of inherent benefit, whether it's visible or what's the benefit of keeping folks incarcerated? Because I think if you kind of understand that, is it a monetary game? Because my understanding of it is that when folks are incarcerated, it comes out of taxes, it comes out of a number of others. So if that's the case, what's the benefit of keeping the people in prison?
Yeah.
And maybe you're able to speak to that. Because I think that at that standpoint, removing kind of the emotional element, which is hard to do sometimes, but at it like an actual, okay, why are you doing this? Like you said, like publicly people will say, oh, we're against this, we need to reduce the population in jails, but obviously there's a systemic push to keep people incarcerated. So, what is the benefit? Because obviously we're like, if you look at like chain gang stuff where they're making different things or they're doing things at that point and they're actually generating money, but it seems like within Atlanta, like there is no kind of program like that until you get maybe possibly like the state penitentiary. Yeah. So I guess in short, what's the benefit?
Sure. Yeah. The Georgia Department of Corrections is a whole nother can of worms. I guess you kind of have to distinguish between like real and perceived benefits. So I guess I'll talk about I don't think that there's much in the way of real benefits to keeping people incarcerated. Certainly people who, have a bail set and can't post bail and therefore are incarcerated for no reason other than that. It's hard to see any sort of real benefit to that being a policy. But, the perceived benefit, I think one thing that mass incarceration, mass pretrial detention does is it doesn't effectively like address the root causes for like why someone is repeatedly being charged with criminal trespass, for example. But it does sort of make that person invisible, right? It makes people invisible. So you take people who might otherwise, be in crisis in the streets, needing some intervention, some mental health intervention, and the solution is, we're going to charge them with crime and then we're going to hold them. And they may not be getting the help they need, probably or not, but they're at least out of the public view, so the public doesn't have to be confronted with that reality, right, of people needing help and not receiving it. There's also, I think, a general sense that folks have who maybe haven't done a deep dive into the topic that, these folks are criminals or alleged criminals, and if you keep them locked up, that will reduce crime. Really there's sort of an inverse correlation there. You can see in the studies, people who are held pre-trial, are more likely to either commit a crime or be charged with a crime, right? So it sort of has the opposite effect. But I think there's a perception that you're keeping dangerous people locked away. And there are also a lot of people and entities, organizations that benefit hugely from mass incarceration. Certainly it justifies really massive budgets for sheriff's offices, police departments, et cetera. It's like, well, there's this huge need to arrest and incarcerate people. And then there are also a lot of vendors, like electronic monitoring systems, healthcare providers who specialize in providing healthcare in jail and prison settings, contractors who, cover the gap in understaffing, a lot of, and of course, the bail bond industry is hugely well organized and does a lot of sort of advocacy at the legislative level around sort of tough on crime laws that then result in a lot of people needing bond. So there are a lot of entities that sort of benefit from the system continuing. Now, whether those interests, align with what the public is theoretically interested in, like, reducing crime, improving public health and wellness and, keeping communities together, I would say there's a pretty big disconnect there, but there are a lot of people who benefit.
I try to think about it, and obviously there's, like you said, healthcare, bail bonds, all those other industries that tied to and that benefit.
Yeah.
But it's so stupid when you look at it, because I think it might have been other countries, and it was just the difference. I was watching a documentary, and it's like the difference their jail system looks like, and they're focused on rehabilitation as opposed to problems. I think it was Sweden. I think they said there was, which is like 70+%.
Yeah.
Which is like, so obviously they're focused on. I don't know. It just seems like we have so many answers to our problems that are just.
And I think if the goal of your incarceration system was like reducing recidivism, it would probably be structured pretty differently than what we have here.
Yeah, like even in places like in this country, like North Dakota has a really great system, and so does Colorado. So I'm like, there's examples, and then of course other states. There's like examples of American justice processes that do work. Even places like New York, where they're offering like different types of alternative sentencing, and they work for even like I guess non-traditional criminal justice. Violent offenses or even like hate crimes and stuff like that, it's that they're still effective.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, no, models exist.
Because like I said, how do you remain motivated to kind of sincerely? Because it's like when you look at like that with your face up against, it's like standing and looking at like the movie poster where it's like the wave is like 100 feet and you're like.
Yeah,
like,
I feel that way sometimes. Yeah,
because you obviously see that what's at play is so much greater than the people that it's affecting. It's like,
I mean, I guess just speaking for me, I mean. I do think it's motivating, like the work that I do. So a lot of the litigation that I do as a lawyer for the ACLU Georgia, a lot of it actually is litigation against the Georgia Department of Corrections, which is it's a massive population of folks who are incarcerated, but like post-conviction. And I think part of the motivation is the work means meeting regularly with people who are incarcerated and sort of getting that firsthand account of what they're experiencing, a lot of which is pretty horrific, and the motivation comes from this sense of like you can't do other when you're directly confronted with people. Like I said before, like I think a lot of what the system does is try to make the experiences of people who are incarcerated invisible to the general public. And I think when you're engaged in work that brings you in direct contact with folks that are incarcerated, it's motivating to want to it's like there's a crisis here, there's a building on fire over here. Come on, guys, even if you're the only one or one of a few people sort of shouting on the street corner or throwing water, like you have to do it, But I also think, I didn't give, I guess on a more optimistic note, it is interesting, like when you poll people on these issues, when you talk to people, there's a lot of the reforms we're talking about are kind of like broadly popular when you actually ask people about them. And now when it comes to actually like, I guess motivating folks to, put that into practice, maybe it's a different story. But again, when you talk to people, these are pretty popular ideas, and
It's messaging.
yeah, messaging, yeah. And there's also, one of the reports I mentioned in my presentation, the Council on Criminal Justice Reform, was this council that was convened in 2018, made a lot of, or before 2018, issued their report in 2018, sort of dealing with the mass incarceration or pretrial detention crisis in Georgia. And the co-chairs of that commission were a Republican appointee to the Georgia Supreme Court, Chief Justice Boggs, and the legal counsel for Governor Nathan Deal, who's Republican. So these are not like bleeding heart liberals, sort of leading this investigation and issuing recommendations, but a lot of the recommendations that a lot of the takeaways that they came from after actually sort of like engaging with folks and trying to identify root causes of issues, align with a lot of what like we and our coalition partners are asking for. Like these aren't sort of like far left or crazy ideas for addressing the crisis. There are some ideas out there that, that,
I just wanted to say,
yeah.
Sarah has started her presentation. I think we went a little overcrowded.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I can wrap it up. We're just kind of, yeah. But,
I just wanted to let you know.
no, I appreciate it. But yeah, so again, like this isn't, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it's like, well, can't we just, the solutions seem very clear. Like once you appropriately identify like the root causes of the problem, there are a lot of sort of points in the system where people can make other choices and actually already have the tools they need to make other choices. Like, so make those, So I guess I'll end on that note, but really appreciate your questions and time tonight. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Not a fun place to be.
No,
It is not.
no.